I'm going to be starting a new project. This is a Mano. Now, the design for this Mano, you can see from some archived photos, is an older design. The center of the piece is hollowed out, and most likely done that way for weight. It has a lot shorter handle. And so what I'm doing first is I'm just kind of measuring the image to get dimensions. Because I want my handle and the length of the piece to be relatively close to this older item. So I'm just going to be writing some of that information down, measuring it out, and then making sure I get it as close as I can, proportionally wise. Now that I have the general dimensions lined out, the first thing I'm going to be doing here is squaring the piece. A lot of times when I go to square it, I'll cut off the ends once I have the line there, just to make it a little bit easier to cut out. I don't know if I'm going to need to do that with this piece, just because it's going to come, the tip of the piece is going to come right up towards the top there, so it really doesn't make a big difference. I'm making the width of the edges a little bit thicker on my piece than what it looks like it is on the image. I'm doing that just because I want to have a little bit more of the grain. So this, you can actually kind of already see it. This piece of koa is really beautiful. It has a really heavy curl to it, and so I'm trying to present as much of that curl as I can, and so I'm trying to minimize the amount of space I have that I'm cutting out. So here I'm just going to finish sketching out the rest of this piece. This piece is going to be a little bit unique because I'm also going to be including an inset. I don't yet know where on the piece, so I haven't quite figured that out yet. It's either going to be on the pommel side or right where the handle goes to the blade of the Mano. And then I'm going to have that inset made from a pearl. I'm getting that ordered special just for this piece, so I'm really excited about that. So I have the rough outer edge cut out on the bandsaw. What I'm doing here is I'm getting ready to drill in the first couple holes. So I'm not going to drill the entire thing. I'm just going to drill maybe 1, 2, 3 times on each end, kind of undecided. That's how I'm going to hollow this out. It's kind of a funny story. This is the second time I've made one of these pieces. The first time I didn't make it entirely by myself. I was actually helping my old boss, who was the individual, the craftsman that trained me, that I learned this from. But he's a chainsaw carver, and so he cut out the center with the chainsaw, and I'm definitely not confident on a chainsaw to do that. So that, and I don't actually think I have a chainsaw. So that's a double no. You notice on the end there, I kind of came in a little bit further than my drawing, and I kind of decided that I wanted a little bit deeper up at the top. I thought it would look a little bit better and be a little bit stronger. So the grain of the wood is going lengthwise, so it should hold pretty strong, but that means that those joints there are going to be kind of a weak point, and so I just wanted to give a little bit more meat just to make sure that's going to hold solid. And so you can see there I've cut out that first hole, and I'm just using a chisel to kind of clean out the edge. My plan was to clean it out just enough that I could get my hacksaw and start going through it, but man, koa is a tough wood. I mean, there's a lot tougher woods. It's not the hardest wood in the world, but it is a tough hardwood, and going that that far down with the hacksaw ended up being a lot more effort than I thought it was going to be. So you can see here I'm first going there. Now this is kind of the teeth on this hacksaw are a lot smaller. It's really meant for finer cuts, and so it just took ages to get just a couple inches down, and I was starting to lose my patience. So once I had enough room, I brought in a larger saw, but same thing, it was just taking forever. So kind of what I decided, I was going to use my little this power saw here. It doesn't go all the way through, but it went enough, and then I had both sides marked, and so I cut it on both sides, and that ended up working out pretty well. But still wasn't a perfect cut, and I'd have to clean it up afterwards, but it was pretty close, and I was very pleased with how that turned out. So I have the entire center hollowed out now. I'm just going to clean it up just a little bit. I'm going to do a lot more work to it later. I'm just wanting to clean up some of those edges, things that are sticking out a lot, just because it kind of bug me. But I'm not going to spend too much time here on the center. I'm really just going to take out some of the larger sections that I kind of messed up on as I was cutting out the centerpiece. Once I get that cleaned up a little bit more, I'm probably going to start shaping, and from there taking the piece down a little bit more. So I shaped it down a little bit. I didn't want to take it too far, and I was looking at that center cut, and it was, I don't know, kind of boring. So it's not uncommon that as I'm working on a piece, I don't have every aspect of it perfectly lined out. What I kind of try to do is I get the general shape in my mind. I get an image of what I'm going for, but then as I'm working through it, I kind of like to float around. I like the wood to kind of guide me a little bit, and it's kind of hard to explain. Really, it's just I'll notice something that looks kind of cool, and I'll want to take that a little further. So here I'm taking just a rasp, and I'm trying to start in some edge work that I'm going to be finishing later. You'll notice that my shirt changed color. So I was getting a little bit tired, and so I called it a day, and I'm on day 2 now working on this piece. And you can see the edge work there that I have done on that center. I still have the other side to do, but for now this is I'm gonna skip forward on that part. But I really liked the way that turned out. I'll have to clean that up. You can't really see it. There's a lot of scratches, rough scratches in that. So I'll be cleaning all of that up and then putting that on the other side. I've got a lot of the shaping done. I still have quite a bit more, but before I get too far, I'm going to be cutting in my insets. Um, I'm not going to take them all the way down yet. I'm just going to get them started. I want to make sure I get them cut in before I go too far down on my piece. The insets that I'm going to be using for this are actually tiger shark teeth, but made out of carved out of abalone pearl. I'm going to post the link for the craftsman that made these teeth. Did an absolutely beautiful job on them. Um, very, very impressed with them, and I was very excited to work with them. I'm actually going to be probably adding those insets into a few more of my pieces in the future. So first thing that I tried to do is I drew it out, sketched around, and I tried to cut into it using like the razor blade, but it wasn't doing what I wanted, and so I got a fine tip for my Dremel, and you can see me here just slowly working around the edges, cutting it in, and then I'm going to use my chisel to take out the core, and I'll just be repeating that process, back and forth until I get it to where I want. One thing that I have to be careful with is I am doing an inset, and so I want the edges to be as close as I can to the actual tooth. I really want it to almost have to wedge into place. And so that's what I'm going to be trying to be careful of, is if there's too much space between the wood and the pearl inset, that it just won't look right. And so I'm just going to be going back and forth the entire time, trying to make sure I keep that close and those tolerances small. So one thing that you'll notice here is underneath the inset, I'm putting in a string. I realized that I was cutting it in deeper and deeper and getting it ready. I had it really tight, and I was concerned I wouldn't be able to get it back out again. And so I just have a string underneath both sides. That way I can set the inset, make sure it's looking good, make sure everything is working, and then I'll be able to pull it back out again without damaging the wood or chipping it. I'm using a dead blow hammer just to kind of tap it in, and make sure that it's looking good. I don't think my camera was recording when it happened, but I actually dropped one of the pearl when I pulled it out one of the times. Oh man, my heart just about sank. Luckily it didn't break. It hit the cement floor and kind of just bounced. But oh man, I didn't even look at it for a couple seconds. I kind of just closed my eyes and sat there just terrified. But it didn't break, so I've already marked the other side, so I know exactly where it's supposed to be, and now I'm just bringing that inset over. I'm going to be shaping it, cutting it in just like the first one, and once I have that cut in, then I can go back to shaping the rest of the piece. So here I'm just kind of swinging it around. Partially for fun, but mainly because I'm checking the balance. I wanted to make sure that the balance was give or take 6 inches away from the hilt, just so that in one hand it would still feel good. If it was too forward heavy, then for a one-handed weapon it wouldn't feel right, and so I wanted to keep track of that. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to drill out the center of the pommel side of this. It's going to be for the lashing later on, and then I'm going to cut in the grooves. I use a tungsten carbide bit for on my Dremel to cut in the grooves. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not bad. I actually kind of prefer it. I've tried a few other ways, and it just worked really well for me. I use my hand to guide myself as I do it. The camera stopped recording as I was going through. One thing you'll notice is my image here is a lot better. I got a new camera, and it has a much better image, so I'm really pleased with it. I'm excited about that. But in any case, I'm just going to cut this out. My camera ended up, ironically, shutting off part of the way through, so skipped most of the drill out on that. So I wasn't even thinking, and I definitely didn't hit record when I set the teeth. So I set the teeth like I normally do, just put a small amount of epoxy and let the teeth sit in there. It just helps so that when I drill out the teeth, as well as when I lash it, just kind of keeps them in place. I don't like using a lot of epoxy because I don't like the way that it looks. And so I primarily prefer it to be held in with the lashing. I just kind of use the epoxy to assist in making it a little bit faster. The bit that I'm using is I think this is also a tungsten bit. It's just a fine point bit, and I have my Dremel maxed at I think it's 3,500 RPMs. So it's not a high-speed Dremel, but it gets the job done. Just about killed me. is I was drilling through and everything was going nice and smooth, and all of a sudden I got about halfway done. I think it's coming up here in just a second. But as I was drilling, I probably overheated my bit is what I did, and it snapped right in the middle of the wood, about maybe 2 millimeter, 3 millimeters below the wood, so too deep to sand down to get to it, and it didn't tap all the way through the other side. I just kind of sat there, looked at my drill for a second. I just couldn't believe it. So I snapped off that bit right into the piece. For a second there, I thought, well, maybe I can just force it through, but no, it's not happening. You can see the piece there. It's about 50% of the bit just snapped off inside of the piece. It irritated me so much that I just put it down and left. So this is later on in the day. I'd come back, gotten a new bit, and I decided I was just going to skip that hole and just drill out the rest. And what I ended up doing is I drilled right next to it. So on one side it still had the one hole, and the other side it had two holes, and then I filled in the unneeded hole that still had that bit in it with shavings that I had from this piece. That way the wood grain matched, and then I glued that in and sanded it down, and it worked really well. It ended up covering that over. So everyone makes mistakes. Making mistakes is just part of building. In fact, sometimes the mistakes that I've made turn into be the best parts of the piece. Not always. Sometimes it just ruins the piece and you have to start over. But luckily, this wasn't the case for here, and I was able to keep going and keep working on the piece. So I have everything sanded down now to 1000 grit, which is what you're looking at here. And the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be finishing putting in the insets. So I have them carved down as deep as they need to go. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some super glue, fast-acting super glue in there. They really don't need epoxy or anything because they wedge in place anyway. I'm kind of just using the super glue to make sure that they're not going to come out, but they probably wouldn't even need it. They probably hold in really well without it. As I was tapping on the pieces though, I was a little bit nervous. I definitely didn't want to break them while I was tapping on them, and so that's what I'm using the cloth here for, is just to kind of soften that blow just a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Pour in some fast-acting glue, some super glue, and then put in that inset. So I have the piece oiled. I always oil it, and then I come back the next day I let it sit for at least 24 hours, and depending on the piece, I'll oil it multiple times. But this one, after just the first oil, is a deep oil, but after just that first oil, it darkened up really nice. You could really see the curl, and so what I'm going to be doing here is lashing. Lashing is probably the most boring part of the whole process. But it does finish up the piece and make it look really nice. So there's a lot of different ways to lash traditionally. So the method that I use is one of the more basic methods, and it creates kind of a triangle shape between the holes in the teeth. And I usually use a single tap. So for every tooth, there's 2 holes in the wood and 1 hole in the tooth. On occasion, depending on the piece, especially if it's larger teeth, then I'll tap the teeth twice. And then on some pieces, I'll do a double ply on my lash. For this one, I'm just doing a single ply. There's some other ways of lashing as well traditionally that are really cool, and I would like to explore those one day. One of my favorite ones that I've wanted to do, which I know it's going to take a while, is pegging, where you actually peg the teeth into place. But that takes quite a bit longer to do, and so I've held off on that, but I'll probably look into that here in the near future.